Great. All right. So much for being here. My name is Ben Reno-Weber. I am the director of the Greater Louisville Project. It is our mission to collect, communicate, and disseminate data that empower and catalyze change in our community. Really excited to be co this conversation around the role of the private sector in building the kind of community that we all want to live in and helping people to reach their full potential. So I'm going to hand over here in just a second to our fabulous president and CEO of our local Chamber of Commerce, Greater Louisville Inc., Sarah Davasher-Wisdom. But first, I just want to note what prompted this gathering, which is data that we pulled together for our last competitive city report in 2019 around the flow of community investment. The Greater Louisville Project, as a 15-year milestone report, looked at where we were making progress and not making progress as a community. And one of the things that we identified was that a question that we were asking is, are we not making the progress we want to make because we don't have the resources to invest? And one of the areas that we looked at was in the private sector. And what we discovered when we dove in was that the answer was no. Across multiple metrics of private sector vibrancy, we were solidly in the middle of the pack. Now, obviously, that's not where we want to be, but when you look at bank loans to small businesses, when you look at venture capital, when you look at SBA loans, we were either in the middle or in some areas farther at the top, with some notable exceptions that we have been exploring more deeply, like CDFIs. But when you look at things like Fortune 1000 company headquarters, we actually are in the middle of the pack. So we do have the resources as a community to be acting similarly to our peers. One of the questions that we want to be asking today is, how do we best leverage those connections in the private sector to really help our business, particularly in this moment, our Black-owned businesses reach their full potential? So that is the impetus for this conversation. Really do it. And Sarah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you to each of you for joining the conversation today. Ben has introduced me, so let me just say that I'm grateful to join you today because I believe the private sector will play an even greater role in the change that needs to happen in our community. This conversation is about the flow of community investment, and I've been especially fascinated by the data ever since it was released that Ben just went over. Many of you are aware that GLI is the Chamber of Commerce, and every year we take a trip to another city to talk about things that we can learn and bring back to Louisville as best practices. This year, we looked inward. We looked inward because it's become very clear that we need to focus on the many inequities in our own community. We need to understand them, and we need to take action. So for 3 days, we focused on West Louisville and what we can do to support West Louisville. One of my big takeaways from that experience was that investment will be the determining factor in whether we have this same community conversation again in a few years. And I don't think any of us want to have that. We don't want to have this same conversation again. We want to see change, and we want to see it now. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? Before we begin our panel discussion, let me assure you that GLI is committed to doing our part to help. Just last month, we launched a bold strategic plan that, among other things, called for the creation of a minority business accelerator that will include pro bono and discounted services to companies that are forming. It will also include strategic connections between minority-owned businesses and corporations for contracting purposes. It will include technical assistance, and it will include mentorship. It will partner with existing incubators already in the community. We've raised about $1.2 million for this, and we'll continue fundraising until we have a 5-year commitment of funds. There are many other important initiatives underway in our community, and Ben just talked about how Louisville's private sector investment and resources are comparable to the middle tier of our peers, but there's a clear case to pushing our capacity to invest more in our own city, with the ultimate goal being to improve our competitive position for future economic development. A strong economy is an inclusive economy. So let's hear from our panel about other efforts that are underway. Each panelist will have about 4 minutes to respond to a question that I ask, and then we'll open this up for conversation. So please put your questions in the chat and we'll get to as many of them as possible. First, I want to turn to Christopher Johnson, Director of Inclusion and Diversity with Humana. Chris, can you tell us about what the community can expect from a company like Humana? And can you talk about how you as a large company in our community can, how you see that small and mid-sized companies can engage their workforce in conversations around inclusivity? So I guess I asked you 2 questions, but I trust you can.
Yeah, you did. You trust me. That's taking a leap. I'll tell you what. So you may have to ask me again. I'll try to take them one at a time. I say this. Humana is, we're proud of the position that we have in the city of Louisville. We take this notion of corporate social responsibility very seriously. It's no secret we're a company that focuses on health and well-being, and we're proud of the work that we do day in and day out, and caring for people, caring for our members. But I think, this time has shown, so 2020 more broadly, and certainly the struggles that have been very present over the course of the last 5 or 6 months has shown that we have a lot more work to do as it relates to racial equity, as it relates to a commitment to inclusive workplaces, a diverse representation and environment that encourages all of us to be our whole best selves, no matter what that is and where we might work. And so, our role in this is to lead where we can. It is to model the kind of behavior, the kind of practices, the kinds of interventions, the kinds of programs that it's going to take to push this community forward. This community meaning the Louisville community, but also using the Humana muscle in the market. And that's a Bruce Broussard term. Our president and CEO often says we have to use the Humana muscle in the market to be able to push this market forward in a number of ways, and that includes around inclusivity and around diverse representation. So we're working to do that through a number of different ways, and in ways that I would love to collaborate with many of you on the call in talking about and working toward. It is about modeling the kind of inclusive behavior, the kinds of behaviors around leader behaviors around inclusivity and cultural competence and an appreciation for diversity that we have pushed forward over the course of the last 5 or 6 months, including some of the investments we've made in the Louisville area with the Louisville Urban League and a commitment of $5 million to revitalizing and rebuilding the city of Louisville after what we saw play out over the course of the last few months. That's one piece of this, but we've made a commitment with every single leader in our company, every single person who leads a team in some way. And we're going to double and triple down on what it means to be an inclusive leader, just what it means to what our expectations, our base level of expectations are for those that lead people in this company. And one of the things I would say for all of you, businesses, small, medium, and large, is that is what it's going to take in part to continue to move this culture forward. And that's what we've doubled and tripled down on, and that's what we're going to continue to do. In addition to what we've always done in this community, as I mentioned, corporate social responsibility is something that we take very seriously here, and that's not going to change. So, I don't know if that answers. I think it may have answered one question. I don't know what the other one was. I can't remember. I'll be honest.
The second question was, what is your guidance to small and mid-sized companies for how they can have these conversations? Are there specific things you would recommend that you maybe use at Humana?
So there are several different things that I think I would recommend. One is, and I'll just be very candid. Hopefully, I know we're recording this, so people are going to be listening. So I'll be careful, but I'll say this. In large part, I would encourage each of you out there to not let perfect be the enemy of good, period. And that goes for a lot of what we do, but certainly as it relates to these kinds of conversations and creating a culture where we can feel safe to have the conversations that need to be had. I think it's about making sure that we lead with positive intent and making sure that we understand that, you don't have to get these conversations perfect. You don't have to do everything exactly right. Good is okay. But you got to do something. You've got to say something. You've got to lead in some way. So that's number one. Number two, I think it's about providing the kind of resources, basic level of resources to those that you interact with, those that may be leaders in your company, those that may represent your company in some way. Allow them the opportunity to dig into greater levels of knowledge by providing them the kind of resources that are necessary. What we've done at Humana is have been very clear about the kinds of resources necessary that we want to provide to leaders across the organization around areas of cultural competence, around areas of engaging in safe space conversations, brave conversations is what we call them, around race and power and privilege. We've engaged in bringing in outside entities, outside thought leaders to be able to share with leaders around these concepts. And I recognize that each of you may not be able to do that, but what you can do is create a toolbox full of curated resources, out there, that exist all over the internet even. And so, some of what we've done is curated some of those resources, to be honest, and have been very clear about adding the kind of disclaimer that's necessary. But at the same time, you got to take advantage of what's out there. We've done that and put it in a centralized repository for leaders to take advantage of. And, there's a number of other things I could touch on, but as we continue this conversation, I'd love to share more and continue to collaborate with others on the call who may have additional questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Let's turn to Audwin Helton. Now, Audwin is the president of Spatial Data Integrations, but I don't know how much time he actually gets to focus on his business because he's so busy doing everything else in this community to advance education. He's a signer to the Path Forward document, and he has been working on a Black business fund that was identified in that document. So, Audwin, can you talk with us a little bit about that effort?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I appreciate everything that you're doing for this community and all your new initiatives. Yes, indeed, I am proud to be a signer for the Path Forward, and I have to give all of my fellow 60-plus signers a lot of credit because we decided early what Louisville needs to do, and it was pretty bold in terms of jobs, justice, economic inclusion, education, health, and housing. And I think I've always played some kind of role in each of those, but particularly with education. I think I'm pretty heavily into that, but on jobs and economic, and you heard Sarah mention the start of a Black business fund. I think we were pretty bold in saying that we need more resources for African-American businesses. I was surprised as I got deeper into this that a lot of the initiatives that were there when I started my business some 26 years ago don't exist right now. I can recall when the NEA Center was a shining star in West Louisville and was a welcoming place for folks to come look at plans. We had the Louisville Enterprise Development Group, that was Louisville Economic Group that was over there to help folks with getting resources on how to start a business. Now, when I drive by the NEA Center, I see a bit of decay, and that's just, it's a shame that has happened. But as I look at business opportunities, some 26 years removed from when I started, I think that there were a lot of opportunities there. I could get a lot of help. Now we're noticing that small businesses don't have the same resources, and we have to improve on that. I think as a result of the unrest, as a result of the pandemic, we're seeing a rise of people wanting to start businesses in Louisville. I think we're seeing something on the something almost like a renaissance, but we have to do more. Sarah, you're doing your part. I would say to the large businesses out there, as a small business owner, as one who reached out to Louisville businesses some 26 years ago to see what I could do to help. I felt like I was turned away some 26 years ago, and I felt so strong about that once I discovered my source of revenue, the federal government, I just went head on toward the federal government and didn't reach back. I felt like when I went in through some business doors, I wasn't received very well. Fortunately, 26 years ago, we had the Kentucky Minority Supplier Development Council. That was a big help to all of the small businesses and would lead us out of the city if we needed some resources. So I would appeal to large businesses that we need to make sure that we are welcoming to small businesses that want to get started. I realize that we or they may not have all of the tickets punched, but we need help in doing that. We need to develop technical assistance in this community. We also need some technical assistance from some of the large corporations that are here. Sarah, I also want to take this opportunity to say that one valuable piece of resource that I think that Louisville has developed and we got started early on was the Louisville Coordinated Community Investment Group, LCCI, that's led by Gina Dunlap and Lynette Glass. We started that prior to the pandemic. We started that prior to the civic unrest. So I think Louisville needs to give ourselves a pat on the back that we have two talented individuals who had already taken the lead, and now that we're in the midst of this storm, we have Lynette and Gina doing their thing to identify outside resources and to assemble the resources that we have in Louisville. So I wrote that down, Sarah, so I had to get that plug in there because I see that as something that's needed and something that we have. But Louisville, we have to do better. One more thing, Sarah, I'll say, and give me 30 seconds, but on the all the data that we look at with our comparable cities, I'm almost tired of looking at it because every time I look at it, Louisville's in that bottom quadrant. We looked at that with education back in 2008. We were in the bottom quadrant. So we started 55 degrees. We started 15,000 degrees. But that was 2008 in education, and we were in the bottom. And now when I look at the data for economic, we're still in the bottom. We've got to develop, some positive aspect that we can give ourselves a lot of pride so that we're in that top quadrant. And I'm hoping that business development and investment will be that key where we will put ourselves in the top and we'll stay there. So those other 16 cities are looking at us as a source of pride.
All great points, Audwin. When you make so many great points, you can talk for as long as you want. I have to say that one of the things you mentioned is the lack of Black-owned businesses that we have. And we at GLI conducted a report last year that showed we only have 2.4% and we're in the bottom of our 16 cities. It's a tremendous statistic. It's embarrassing. So let's talk about how our larger companies can work with some of our diverse owned businesses. And to do that, let's turn to Eboni Edwards. Eboni is the Supplier Diversity Manager at LG&E. And I have to say that I got to give props to Paul Thompson and Tony Parrott for leading the mayor's equity and contract procurement task force. But Eboni is the lady driving this thing. She is making it happen. She is behind the scenes doing the work. And I'm pleased to have her on this panel. So Eboni, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Actually, I wanted to talk about that committee and what we're doing there. I don't know if you all have heard about the executive order the mayor signed that said that we were creating this equity and contracting task force. And just from the inside, I can tell you that my CEO and Tony Parrott, the head of MSC, are taking this very seriously. I've talked to my CEO more than I've ever wanted to talk to him this week alone about what are we doing about, the growing Black businesses in Louisville. I just got off a phone call with Renee Goatley, Kelly Watson, Sharice Horn, and even though our leaders are thinking top level about those objectives, I've got a list of how can we get into some good trouble. What can we actually put forth? What are our goals? And then, yes, we know we're going to make some people upset that are part of the task force, but if you signed up to be a part of this task force, there's work to be involved. It's not just saying that you have signed up and you've created this policy. No, what are we actually going to do to put forth this policy? What are we actually going to do the work? What is the end goal? So that's what we're really trying to work towards. So in 2020, the end of 2020, we've got something we could take back to the mayor to say, hey, these are the initiatives we want going forward, and this is how we're going to do it. And hey, we've already started. So that one I'm extremely excited about. It's been a labor of love, and I think it's going to be better, and I think it's going to really make a difference. And then the other one is the Kentucky Supplier Diversity Collaborative, something I just created. But it is a way for us in Kentucky to start thinking about what can we do better. So Audwin, you said this earlier, 26 years ago, if you would have went to a large business, how were you received? It wasn't the best way. So my question to all these organizations that are a part, what can we do better? We go over best practices. We talk to small businesses and we say, what do they need from us to either grow capacity, to grow as an organization? What is missing? So we've had the Chamber of Commerce from Louisville, from Lexington. We have Humana, Papa John's. We have Kentucky Procurement Technical Assistance Center, Small Business Administration, and we literally talk about how are we doing in Kentucky and how can we make a bigger impact with our small and our diverse businesses. So the work is we're working on it. We are actively going out and doing things that I think will really make changes, but it's going to take some good trouble, and that's it.
Excellent points, Eboni, and amazing work. Let's go to George Tinsley for a moment. George is working with Yum on a global initiative to help grow minority franchise ownership. And so as we're talking about growing Black businesses, franchise ownership is one key way to do that. And I believe that George has joined us, although I don't see him on, oh, there, I see George, yes. George, tell us a little bit about Yum's initiative and how people can maybe plug into that.
Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, all right. Well, let me apologize for being late getting on the call. I'm down here in Florida struggling trying to get everything together. But as mentioned, my name is George Tinsley. I'm originally from Louisville, Kentucky, in the Smoketown area of Louisville, Kentucky, and I worked there in Louisville with Kentucky Fried Chicken. Started off with them back in 1976, and later became a franchisee with KFC in 1984. So back in the day, there was some unrest around the country, as most know, and KFC started a minority program then of Black franchisees and other minorities, and so that program got off to a pretty good start. As I said, I became a franchisee in '84. The program started in about 1980, around 1980, and it did not work out the way that I think all intended it for to work out. So that now that we're in 2020, and we're having a lot of unrest, in particular around the country, and as well there in Louisville. Yum, who now is the owner of the brands KFC, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and Habit Burger, has a $100 million initiative that they're working on. And let me qualify this: I do not work for Yum, and I'm not a board member. I'm a committee member, and my job is to help with my experience having gone through these programs in a number of different. I'm actually a franchisee in a number of different franchises in Florida, and of course there in Louisville. So I have a lot of experience in working with some of these corporations with their programs and getting them off the ground and being successful. So of course, Yum has a $6 million commitment there in Louisville that they're working with an initiative in supplier diversity, franchising, and also senior manager leadership, as well as some other educational programs and so forth they're working with. And they've already gotten started. I don't know all the details there, but I do know that I've talked to the CEO, David Gibbs, James Frith, who runs the Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity program globally, and of course John Mays there in Louisville with KFC. And there's some other key personnel that are in the area that are working with the community. So, and in a broad scope, that's my part that I'm playing, and this comes from my heart being broken with all of the things that are going on around the country, and then specifically there in Louisville. And as I look at my community that I grew up in there in Smoketown, I'm very concerned about seeing them, Smoketown, get off the ground and get some things going there. There's very few Black businesses in that section, and as I mentioned, I've heard we're underperforming from the Black perspective throughout the city of Louisville. A lot of concentration in the West End, but throughout the city. So I'm kind of pulling from all resources that I have. I am a small business owner there in Louisville at the Louisville Airport, where we have 4 restaurants there, 6 restaurants, I'm sorry. And today only 2 are open there due to the COVID situation. So personally, I'm having some struggles myself there, but certainly my initiatives are broad stroke in trying to do whatever I can to assist.
Thank you so much, George, and thank you for your continued investment in Louisville and for being part of this discussion today. Just a reminder to please put any questions in the chat, and I did see that Stephen has posted in the chat that we really need big businesses to locate to West Louisville. So that's something to keep in mind too, as we're thinking about community reinvestment and how we help West Louisville and how we invest in our region. So now I want to turn to Scott Koloms. He is the president and CEO of FMS and the founder of Canopy. And I'll let him talk about Canopy, but also want to ask him to talk about the public-private partnerships and how those partnerships can really contribute towards social good. He was a speaker on our glide trip, and he talked a lot about a partnership in West Louisville that is so important to overcoming one of the biggest barriers that many citizens face, and also second chance employers. So I've just teed you up, Scott, to talk a lot. You take it away.
All right, thanks, Sarah, and really honored to be on this panel. Amazing work with my co-panelists, the stuff that we're all doing in community. Thanks for inviting me. I'll start off with a sort of a broad stroke of the work that I do. My life's work is really in making this argument towards this need to redefine the way we think about capitalism, shifting it from the concept of the end game of capitalism is to accumulate wealth, and moving it into the space of the idea that capitalism, really what it does great is it solves human problems, and shifting that mindset. And of course, right now we have needs and need to put some emphasis on inequalities that we're seeing show up everywhere. And also, of course, with what's happening now, healthy workplaces is a theme that we all need to consider as well. But that being the broad scope, what my work really does is we're trying to get small and mid-sized businesses to incorporate social and environmental good into their business models, and getting it to the point to where you're actually measuring that social and environmental good the same way you measure operational efficiencies and profitability. When I talk about this, I like to talk about a spectrum, and maybe on one side of the spectrum you have traditional corporate giving program, to where there is a department typically that is charged with distributing funds, often to nonprofits. We all know how that mechanism works. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have a business that is integrated a social and environmental good to such an extent that if you were to remove that from that business would collapse. And my work is about moving companies along that trajectory. So to give some examples that Sarah alluded to, this is definitely about making money, but it's redefining the way of the process towards making that money by incorporating something that positively impacts neighborhoods, communities, and people. So in my company, I own a janitorial service. That's what FMS is. We really moved into this space when we moved towards intentionality. The first thing we did is we asked ourselves, what are some of the problems within our organization that we need help with? And as you can imagine, in a janitorial service, it's turnover. So with that, we began talking to our employees to identify what their needs were. And we were attempting to increase retention. And through that, we formed several really creative, innovative partnerships that were based on the results of the surveys we got from our employees that essentially said, we want to better manage our own money. We would like opportunities to have more sustainable wealth. We want to live healthier lives. We want to quit smoking. We want to lose some weight. All of these things came out of the 570 employees that responded to our survey, which was great. And then we really zeroed in our work into those areas. So our social mission in our company is to provide access and opportunities for our employees and to allow the neighborhoods where they live to thrive. And then we narrowed that down into two specific pieces of work, and that's financial health and physical health. And once we got into that narrow scope, we began to form these really creative partnerships. One that I'm really proud of that we just rolled out 3 weeks ago is called Working Your Way Home, excuse me. And Working Your Way Home, our goal is in 2 years, we're going to have 50 janitors will have home ownership. And what we've done is we formed a partnership with HPI, Access Ventures, L Home, local financial institution. And the way the program looks is the employee commits to work for me for 2 years. And over the course of that 2 years, they're going to save $100 per month. My company matches it. And then the grant through the partnership does another match on top of that. Along the way, over those 2 years, they're getting financial literacy classes. They're learning how to budget. They're learning how to take on home ownership, things like insurance, things like that. And the excitement around the program is off the charts. I can tell you one of our participants, elderly gentleman, was in tears and said to us that he was the first person in his entire family to ever move towards owning a home. And, you know, at the end of this, yes, I'm in this because that's where my heart space is. And the way that you make it sustainable is that it contributes positively to the financial health of my company also. So the retention numbers in my organization are a fraction of the traditional janitorial service. Another program we're really proud of is a partnership with Choosewell, and I don't know if you're familiar with that nonprofit, anyone, but that's a nonprofit that provides services to single moms that are in recovery, that have children that are 3 years or less. And we went in and worked with them and asked if they could supply folks to do cleaning for us. We asked if there were any barriers. Transportation was a primary barrier. So we went to TARC with this program that we created. TARC gave us a van, and we got 7 women living wage, and we formed a partnership with Passport for them to clean the building. And what we do is we supply the nonprofit with $200 a month per head for each woman, and they're receiving the wraparound services from the nonprofit. We're doing professional skills training. They have a living wage job and they're getting a ride to work. And I can tell you the first 7 months of the program, there wasn't one missed shift. And that in the janitorial business is unheard of. It's crazy. And of course, the customer, the relationship we have with the customer is now values aligned, which is a whole different ballgame in terms of, you know, usually my relation, I shouldn't say usually, but oftentimes a relationship with the janitorial service is, hey, you forgot to empty my garbage can. That's extend my relationship. But with, you know, with this sort of work, you begin to develop meaningful relationships with your customers. So that's how small and mid-sized businesses, I think, can start to work towards this space. But then briefly, I'll go into what Canopy is. Canopy is the nonprofit that I formed that is working to make Kentucky first in the good business movement. That is, we're trying to make Kentucky known for having socially conscious, environmentally conscious businesses. And the exciting part, and Sarah and Ben, you guys know this, but we're getting ready to roll out the Canopy certified program. It will begin beta testing, and I think I saw Ted Nixon on here. DDW, Ted's company, is one of our alpha companies that will be going through the beta testing in November and December. And essentially what the Canopy certified program is it's an effort to help guide companies towards this, along this trajectory of more intentionality and incorporating social and environmental good into their organization. It looks at 4 different tracks. It looks at leadership, it looks at people and culture, it looks at external impact, and it looks at governance. And the way it's set up is there's a set of initial requirements to get certification that it's accessible, but it asks for some bare minimum requirements. Does your company have a DE&I statement? Do you have a stated social or environmental mission or focus? Do you have infectious disease preparedness and a response plan in place? Just to give you a couple of ideas of what this asks for. But the cool part about it is that we've also worked with local folks to create curriculum that's attached to this. As companies move through this, they have the ability to learn and adopt. So Sarah, that's my work. I think that's the fastest I've ever said it. So there you go.
Well, good job. Well said. Lots of meat packed into just a few minutes there. So I still haven't really seen many questions in the chat, but the good news is that I've got plenty in my head. So I'm going to throw a question out to the whole panel and just ask, as you think about all of the good work happening in our community and then reflect upon the data from the GLP report, what do you think we can do to help companies understand how their investment has a return in our community and motivate companies to invest even more? And we've got some great companies in our community doing great work. We've got several of them on here who told us about that work. But for those who maybe aren't investing as much, some of this, maybe the mid-sized companies who are not reflected on the panel today, are there things that can be done to help encourage that investment? And again, I'll throw it out to the whole panel.
Sarah, I want to make a comment. I was looking at the data from GLP. I would like to recommend that we dig deeper into the data. You know, I'm at this point where, you know, I applaud these kids out there fighting for justice. You know, we need economic justice also. So we have great data. I think we need to dig deeper to see for investment opportunities, for you know, bank loans. How are we doing from a Black business point of view? So Ben, I hope that's something that we will take a look at. And I want to recognize Jim Beckett on this call, because we have something going on in that 7th and 9th Street corridor that is going to be extremely exciting. I don't even know the number of acres that sit along that corridor near Park Hill, but the vision of one Black man to say we need to have mixed use development, and we need to have it for our citizens so that they can see what it's like to have great economic activity going on. So I want to applaud Jim for saying that and for doing that. So big ups to you, Jim. But the mid-sized companies, we need you to be proactive, to get involved with those of us on the path forward. And Monica, maybe you can post the path forward document up if no one has had the opportunity to read it. But after reading it, feel free to report back to me or to Monica as to how you can help. But just one example of how large companies, mid-sized companies can help is read that document and get back. You probably recognize some of the signers. Just report back to us and let us know how you feel you can help.
Hey, Sarah, I wanted to answer your question. One thing that I have been pushing for, and I finally got, is an economic impact study. And what that is a study to show why is it important to focus on small businesses and diverse businesses, because it goes beyond the spend. Because everybody wants to say, I spent this much money with a diverse business, a woman-owned business, an African-American-owned business, but it takes it a step further and asks, what's the indirect impact? What's the induced impact? Did somebody go out and get daycare, buy McDonald's? And then how much taxes do they pay? So it asks the question a little further along of, if you invest in a company in West Louisville, what is the impact of having that business there? And then not only having the employees, but what are they spending their money on? So those questions are starting to be asked on a high level. And I know our Electric Edison Institute, we just finalized one with like 28 companies, and it's amazing about how much money gets spent in the United States for utilities. So how can we kind of take that impact and say, all right, we've got our first one, but how do we make it bigger? How do we grow that impact? Now that we know what our impact is, how do we grow it for small businesses? How do we grow it for diverse businesses? And how do we grow it for businesses in Louisville? So that's the goal of having a study like that, is to see where that growth can go.
That sounds really tremendous, Eboni. Is that study going to be publicly accessible? And if so, what is the timeline that you're operating on?
I am running that through our executives right now. The other utilities have made it publicly accessible. You can get the Electric Edison Institute, the one for the entire list of organizations. Ameren has already posted it on the Illinois regulatory website. PG&E has already started posting it. So I think it has enough data, and it has such good data that it will probably be somewhat externalized, but we are running through that. And it's a really good, I love that report. It really shows what we can do if we work together.
Excellent. We'd be happy to help you share whatever data you're willing to release after you run through your process there. That's great. I see some comments in the chat regarding Humana's efforts, so it sounds like more information might be helpful to have on that. Chris, can you maybe talk a little bit more about your efforts and how you will realize success? It seems like there are a lot of ways you've posted in the chat already.
I think, you know, one of the things I said in the chat, Sarah, is just that our efforts around, an inclusive environment and the needs to do more around corporate social responsibility don't necessarily, there is no measurement that we're weighing against, if that makes sense. What we're trying to do is do the right thing, is to do and to be better, and let that be our guide. And so in some ways that goes against, I know, what companies and corporations often do as it relates to some of the investments that are made. But I think for us, keeping an eye on and that lens of the long term and making certain that we're doing what we can in areas of West Louisville, for example, with the Louisville Urban League and the Sports and Learning Complex and those kinds of investments. Those are investments that are going to be, we know, long lasting and structural and make a difference in the lives of people and families for generations to come. So to me, that is success. Now we're gonna, obviously there are some metrics attached to that. We're gonna take a look at the return on investment there, but it's more about being and doing right for the communities that we serve and in this, our corporate home. I think the other thing I would say, if you're listening to Eboni's comments just a moment ago, I think the other thing I would say is in terms of being successful and measuring success, for us, it's about making sure that we're also being much more open and more public as it relates to our efforts, our internal efforts around diverse representation, especially, but also the inclusive environment that we always talk about. And so, for the first time, we've made publicly available a report that is, for years has been, limited to our internal distribution channels and our internal associates. So it's our annual inclusion and diversity report that talks about the efforts that we made around around our I&D programs and our diverse representation. And so that's available on our investor relations site for the first time this year. It's around these efforts to, again, be much more open and much more transparent is the word I'd use, around what we're doing, why we're doing it, and quite candidly, the work that is still to come, because there's still a lot of work to do.
Great point. Thank you for that explanation. Going back up the chat a little bit, I missed a question that I want to pose now. How can companies move past statements on social issues and move that to action? I know a lot of work is underway, but it might not be as public yet. And then the follow-up question there is, are we missing any non-traditional approaches to investment? And I'll throw that out to our whole panel.
I don't want to be the only one answering questions, but for LG&E KU, we are asking that action questions now. I'll tell you, I'm a part of a utility conference where we are literally pulling our executives in from Duke Energy, Dominion Energy, Entergy. These are huge utilities, and we're going to put them on a panel and say, okay, we've talked about it all 2020. What are we doing in 2021? Like, let's start thinking of actions. And you put some executives on a board together and one of them speaks action, the other one's going to say, okay, can we start doing that same thing? So we're kind of asking that question of what are the action items that we can start doing in supplier diversity. It's been a big one because we know if you can actually grow equity and stop just talking about growing equity, but grow equity, that could be tremendous for our community. So supplier diversity has been kind of taking that forefront on how do we grow some of that in our communities and putting action behind it. So that's a little bit of it.
Yeah, and Sarah, I saw someone that put this Philadelphia Anchors for Growth and Equity in the chat, and I think it was Tom. I just took a quick look at that, and it showed that the Philadelphia corporate community looked at how many dollars were going outside of the city, and then said if we can just capture 25% of that and spend those dollars on companies that are located in Philadelphia, how many jobs that translates into, how much money that translates into. I would say we could even look at that through a minority lens to talk about how much money we're spending outside of the city of Louisville, if X number of dollars went to small minority companies, what that would do to create jobs. If we were to look at dollars being spent by West End companies. So thanks, I think, Tom, for putting that in the chat. That's an excellent resource for us to take a look at.
Excellent. Yes, I would love to take a look at that. I've got that open already here. All right, Ben, it looks like GLP is going to take a role in measuring our success in some of these action items. I know I would love to hear about that because I think it's important that we all are aware of each other's action items so that we can all collaborate when possible. And I do have to say, before I turn it over to you to answer that question, I have never seen our community collaborate more than it is right now. And that is a source of pride for me. I think it's important that we all know what one another is doing, that we're all working together. We're not competing against each other. There's so much work to be done. There's plenty of work for all of us that want to be in this space, that need to be in this space. So Ben, tell us what you're going to do to help measure some of the success and some of the action.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I mean, I think, one of the things that as a community we have an unfortunate tendency to do is tolerate mediocrity and to not hold ourselves accountable to our aspirations and goals. And so I'm really excited that our board, and I note that our board chair, Jeff Polson from the Jewish Heritage Fund for Excellence, is on this call, is pushing us to partner really closely with a path forward to establish a sustainable mechanism for holding our community accountable to the promises that we are making right now. So that, as Dr. Unseld highlighted, we're not just talking about it, we're really saying, listen, do we do this or not do it? And I think, we can look to the model of 55,000 degrees, which I know Audwin was, where we said, listen, this is our aspiration. And even if we didn't hit that full aspiration, we were transparent and clear about that. And in the process of shooting for those goals, we got a lot of things accomplished. So that's part of what we're going to be doing on a community-wide level. We've got some really exciting data that we're pulling out around the density of Black-owned businesses. We've got work around the digital divide. We've got work around housing and evictions. And we're really going to spend this year working closely with a path forward that as we are to evolve and articulate community aspirations, particularly for our Black citizens, that we are then able to say 5 years from now, did we do it or not do it? Now, there's some things that we're not going to do because GLP has some restrictions around the way that we do things, but we are partner with organizations that can, for example, take the data that Eboni is talking about, or some of the data that we're going to be getting from the water company around shutoffs and some of that, and highlight community partners. And I will just note, Dr. Unseld is in the process of working with a group called Data for Justice that's going to be able to take up some of those pieces. So I just think it's really exciting that we're going to be able to be doing some of that stuff. And I want this group to be aware that we're going to be continuing to watch this. And I'm excited about the work that we're doing, and we want to partner with you guys on that.
And Sarah, to go back to your question, and to use an example on a smaller scale of just a mid-sized business, which we are, our process looked a little bit like this, to where we asked ourselves, what does it look like to be a truly diverse, equitable, inclusive company? And then we ended up realizing that we were sitting in a room talking about this, and that might not be the best approach. So the idea is we took it out to our people and said, tell us what you think an inclusive company looks like. What could FMS look like that would truly make you feel included, that would truly make you feel heard? And we put that out there to our people. And then once we got that data in, we started to have some understanding of what we needed to accomplish. And then we went through a negotiation to identify what can we do first, what's the high priority, and really, so the measurable is accomplishing what we've agreed to accomplish together. And as we make those steps, and some of them appear to be more traditional, right? We want more Black representation in our senior leadership, but also some not surprising, but some more interesting things came out. Like, we would like participation in certain decision making. We would like more information. We don't feel like we're getting access to this. So all of these things showed up, and together with our people, we came up with our plan and to move forward. And so we have very clear markers as we accomplish goals.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott. I've seen some comments in the chat about the national image, or the image that Louisville has on the national scale, and how that's going to impact us going forward. So I'd like to focus on that for a few minutes. And I'm going to turn to George, in part because I haven't heard him talk in a few minutes. But George, you are located in Florida, and you've got businesses here. So from your standpoint, not living here now, what do you think can be done to change that image, and what is our opportunity here? If you're talking, we can't hear you. Might need to unmute.
There we go.
Yes, there we
Yeah.
go. I'm sure
Yes.
everything you just said was incredibly brilliant, so please repeat it.
Yeah. I said I still consider myself a Louisvillian, even though I'm down here in Florida. Louisville is my home. And the image has not been good. And I spend a lot of time speaking about Louisville in a positive manner, and that these things are happening around the country. And you know, the image is somewhat the way it is in a lot of areas where these hot spots jump up, and of course the Breonna Taylor scenario has just been out there consistently, and so that's a toughie. I also serve on the NBA to Louisville board there in Louisville, and looking at bringing the NBA team there with Dan Issel and Steve Higdon and those guys. And certainly the image of Louisville has something to will have something to do with how successful that is, as well as you heard the Toronto Raptors, the rumor about the Raptors possibly moving to Louisville for a tentative spot because of the travel back and forth between Canada and the U.S. So it is key. I'm one of the good things about being on this call is hearing some of the things that are going on in Louisville that I was not aware of. But you know, it's not anything that can't be fixed. It's obviously a PR campaign around the good things that are going on in Louisville is always advantageous. With this COVID scenario and at the airport transportation end, you know, we're having a real tough time there, and that's happening around the country. But a small destination airport like Louisville, Muhammad Ali Airport, is you know, has a different effect there. So that being part of the image with conventions and different things, Derby and so forth, that go on in Louisville that have been able to have had to take a back seat. But and I might just make a little comment too here about the last question, which was the intentionality of working towards bettering Louisville. I think the uncomfortable conversations that I'm hearing that Eboni and some of the others are having within their company are of utmost importance. This has to be a commitment from the top down, and we have to have people at the top that look like the areas that need help and that need some focus. And it has to be some bonuses and commitment tied to some of these goals and objectives, and they have to be revisited on an ongoing basis, or else when things die down, they go away and they take, you know, their back seat. Some of our mid-sized companies are really struggling with this COVID and you know, being quarantined, some of the quarantines. So you know, we've got to have a plan and work together, and it sounds like there's a lot of things going on in Louisville that will make that happen and the image improve.
Well said, thank you. Does anyone else on the panel want to comment on that question about how we can turn this around? I think it's a great final question for us.
I'll make a comment, and George, I haven't met you, but the Toronto situation, I think, is a real situation, and some of these stars that I guess we can categorize them as stars are forming negative opinions about Louisville. And I mean, this Breonna Taylor case is huge. We've had some real miscarriage of justice that have happened, and it is very real. So I think we need to pay attention to it, as Mr. Tinsley talked about. that, it could come down to concerts that potentially could come here, convention that could come here. So thanks for lifting that up, because it is a very real time situation of how we're looked at by others outside of Louisville.
Definitely is a great example. Definitely real time. So I know we have a 1 p.m. end time here, and I'm going to turn it back over to Ben. I think this has been an excellent conversation, and I feel enriched for having it with you. So thank you for your participation. Ben, back to you.
Thanks, Sarah. And I am just grateful to the people on this call, people in our community who I know wanted to be here and couldn't, for the leadership that is being exercised at this moment. Has not escaped anyone's attention, the power of what the Breonna Taylor case as a way to bring attention to Louisville. It has mostly been negative, but I do think there's a real opportunity for us to say, this is a city that reinvented itself in the aftermath. This is the home of Breonna Taylor. And, this is our opportunity to make her name mean something. So thank you all in all this. And I look forward to continuing the work and conversations that we are having that will, I believe, go beyond conversations to action. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
All right.